The evening was quieter than usual in Los Angeles, the kind that arrived softly like an old memory. Keanu Reeves stood near the balcony of his dimly lit home, fingers resting loosely against the railing, city lights shimmering beneath him like restless stars. His hair, darker now with gentle threads of gray, moved with the wind like a memory trying to speak. For years, interviews, cameras, and fan questions had circled around one name beside his own. One name that didn't need introduction, because every mention of it stirred something delicate in the air. Sandra Bullock. Not because she was just an actress, not because they once shared screens, laughter, press rooms, or applause. It was something deeper, something quieter, an understanding that two lives sometimes touch with such grace that even when paths divide, the warmth remains. Tonight, as he stared into the night, a familiar thought echoed inside him. Do some people stay in your heart even after life moves forward? He closed his eyes and time rewound, quietly, like a curtain being drawn open inside his mind. Years earlier first sparked not romance, but respect. On the set of Speed, the energy was electric. Cameras rolled, crew members hurried, the bus engine roared like a dragon threatening to wake the city. Keanu, younger then, thoughtful even in silence, stepped into his scene. And then she walked in, Sandra radiant without trying, laughter like sunlight cutting through seriousness. Everyone felt the chemistry, not romantic at first, but human, a comfort, a kindness, a playful spark that didn't demand attention yet captured it effortlessly. One afternoon between takes, Sandra sat on a sidewalk curb sipping coffee, messy hair, dusty jeans, eyes tired yet bold. Keanu dropped beside her without a word, not for conversation, not for noise, just presence. Sometimes connection begins without language. She glanced at him with a half-smile. You ever feel, she said, watching traffic crawl by, as if life is moving too fast but you don't know where it's taking you? Keanu nodded slowly, reflecting before speaking, a habit he never escaped. Maybe it's not about knowing where it goes, he murmured, but who sits next to you during the ride. Sandra laughed, genuine, bright, a sound he remembered even decades later. And if someone asked him privately, he would admit. That was the first moment he truly saw her. A friendship that grew like wildflowers. Hollywood expected romance. Headlines waited like hungry wolves, but they never fed that expectation, not then. Instead, they built something rarer, friendship with depth, respect without noise, care without need to define. After Speed, both became icons, alone yet watched everywhere. Sandra entered rooms like warm firelight. Keanu entered like still water, calm, quiet, deeper than he let on. Together, they were balance. They shared private dinners away from cameras, quiet jokes during award shows, long conversations about grief, purpose, the cost of fame. Sometimes they went months without meeting, but when they did, time folded like paper. Nothing faded. There were moments when people whispered, why aren't they together? But life isn't always about answers. Sometimes it's about timing, fate, unspoken things two hearts may not be ready to name. Years passed, but something never left. Keanu lived through losses most never knew. Pain carved itself into his silence. Sandra, too, found storms behind glamorous curtains. Success doesn't protect a soul from ache. But whenever life grew heavy, one name in his phone glowed like a bridge back to warmth. Sandra. And she, too, in her most fragile moments, found comfort in his existence, not as a lover, but as a constant. A rare soul who understood without demanding explanation. When they reunited years later for the lake house, the world watched like children hoping for a fairy tale. The way they looked at each other on screen didn't feel scripted. It felt like hearts recalling something beautiful, something familiar, something time couldn't erase. Sandra once admitted in an interview that she could have probably loved him, but she valued their friendship more than risking it. And Keanu, he smiled that small, knowing smile. Who wouldn't have been in love with her? He said gently, not claiming her, not implying a past, just honoring her presence in his life. It wasn't a confession of romance. It was a confession of appreciation. The kind that runs deeper. Now the question that never died. Years later, even as life changed, careers evolved, relationships grew and faded, fans still whispered. Is Keanu Reeves still in love with Sandra Bullock? Or was the world simply in love with them together? Keanu never answered directly. Sandra never claimed certainty. But every time they spoke of each other, the world heard warmth, real, respectful, enduring. Sometimes love doesn't need titles. Sometimes it lives in gestures. A quiet check-in call. A gift sent without occasion. A memory shared with a soft smile. A friendship protected from headlines for decades. And tonight, as Keanu stood beneath the moon, one truth felt undeniable. People enter your life for reasons unseen. Some stay by your side. Some stay inside your heart. Sandra Bullock, her laugh, her strength, her softness, stayed. Not as a label. Not as a headline. Not as a claim. But as a beautiful constant, like a star you don't see every night, yet know still exists. Keanu exhaled, long and thoughtful. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew one thing with gentle certainty. Some bonds don't age. Some feelings don't fade. Some souls remain connected even across distance, time, and unspoken words. And whatever name the world chose for them, friends, co-stars, something undefined, what they shared was something deeper than romance could promise. A timeless bond built on kindness, respect, and understanding. A connection not everyone gets in one lifetime. Rain tapped softly against the window of Keanu's home like distant footsteps of memory returning after a long exile. Evening had stretched into night, yet he had not moved from the balcony where he stood earlier. The city below had begun to fall asleep, lights fading like stars dissolving into dawn. He finally stepped inside, slowly, thoughtfully, as though the air carried a story that had been waiting years to be told. He poured himself tea, chamomile, not coffee tonight, and sat with the cup warming his palms, the warmth seeping into old places inside his heart that even fame couldn't touch. Loneliness was a quiet companion of his, never violent, just present like a shadow. Yet there was one person whose memory could make even silence feel alive. Sandra. The world saw their chemistry like a flame, but chemistry was only the surface of what existed beneath. What they shared felt more like the gentle, eternal burn of embers that never faded even when the fire was left untouched. After the lake house, they parted again, not in conflict, not in distance of emotion, but because life has its own rhythm, and sometimes even the most meaningful connections must move in separate currents. Yet like waves, they always returned eventually to shorelines that remembered them. Months passed, then years. Film rolls came and went. Red carpets rolled like rivers of flashlights and noise. Behind all of it, Keanu remained himself, a soul stitched together by scars, resilience, and strange gentleness. Sandra, too, navigated her own storms, finding strength even when the world expected her only to smile. They were similar in ways the world never paid attention to, two hearts that loved deeply, lost deeply, felt deeply, and kept going despite it. Their connection remained suspended between them like a long-lived constellation, not always visible, but always there. One evening after a charity event, Sandra sat in her living room surrounded by half-opened letters from foundations, scripts waiting on her table, and photos from sets long gone. She had worn a beautiful dress hours earlier, her smile bright enough to light up the cameras, but now she sat barefoot in sweatpants, hair tied loosely, face wiped of glamour, looking every bit like a woman with worries, dreams, and private aches. She held a cup of tea, stared at it with weary familiarity, and wondered how strange it was that happiness and heaviness could live inside the same body. Her phone buzzed, screen illuminating the dim room. Keanu Reeves' incoming call. It was late. He rarely called unannounced. Sandra hesitated not out of reluctance, but because her heart tightened with something unspoken, the kind of warmth you feel when someone remembers you at a moment they didn't need to. She answered, voice soft, not performing, not acting, just real. "Hey," she whispered. His voice, deep and mellow, traveled through the receivers like a familiar road. "I was thinking about you," he said without preface, without reason, just honesty. "Wanted to know if you're okay." Sandra leaned back into the sofa cushions, breath shaky in a way she couldn't explain. She could have told him she was fine, that the night was easy, that everything was perfect, but something about his sincerity broke through the armor that fame demanded she wear. "I'm tired, Keanu," she admitted, voice trembling slightly, not just physically, but in those places you can't photograph. Silence followed, not heavy, but comforting. A silence that only exists between two people who don't need words to be understood. Keanu exhaled gently, the kind of sigh that felt like a hand on the shoulder, soft, steady, grounding. "You don't have to be strong every day," he said, voice quiet as a candle flame. "It's okay to rest." She felt tears prick behind her eyes, not from sadness, but from being seen, truly seen. The kind of emotional visibility the world rarely gave actors they admired, because admiration was too loud to hear vulnerability beneath it. At night they talked for hours, about films, about life, about aging, about fear, about the strange loneliness that comes with success. They laughed until their stomachs ached, reminiscing about old moments the world never knew, like the time Keanu tripped during rehearsal but turned it into a dramatic monologue just to make Sandra laugh, or when she once spilled her drink on her dress minutes before press, and he covered for her by accidentally spilling his too, making it seem like a mutual mishap. It was not romance, it was not confession, it was connection, raw, honest, human. After midnight, Keanu paused, voice softer than ever. "Sandra," he murmured, "you're one of the few people I never lost along the way." Her eyes shut, her pulse steadied. She felt something shift, not between them, but inside herself, a realization like light passing through a closed door. "You're one of the few I never stopped caring about," she replied gently. Neither spoke of love. The word didn't need to be said. Sometimes love isn't a declaration, it's a presence. The world keeps asking, but some answers live between heartbeats. Weeks later, paparazzi photographed them leaving a charity gala together, not holding hands, not embracing publicly, just walking side by side, laughing with an ease that no script could fake. The internet exploded. Headlines rose like storms. Are they finally together? Is this love after all these years? Has the timeless chemistry turned real? But neither confirmed, neither denied. Not because there was a secret, but because not everything in life is meant for display. Some connections are too sacred to exist as clickbait. Some bonds survive because they are protected, not because they are exposed. Sandra once told a close friend, quietly away from publications, that Keanu was the first man who made her feel understood without effort. Keanu, in one heartfelt interview, described her as someone whose presence could bring peace to even the most chaotic day. Yet both guarded that bond like a treasure. For them, the world did not need answers. Only hearts need them. A private meeting, years of unsaid words. One autumn afternoon, Sandra drove to Keanu's home. No cameras followed. No headlines predicted it. Sometimes the most meaningful chapters begin silently. She brought with her a small box, nothing extravagant, just personal. Inside it was something she had kept for years, a photograph from the set of Speed. Keanu laughing mid-moment, she laughing beside him, sunlight hitting both of them like the universe approving of that laughter. He opened the door before she could knock, as if he sensed her presence. "You kept this?" he whispered when he saw the photo, voice cracking with softness. She nodded, eyes steady, vulnerable. "It reminded me that even when everything else changed, that was real." He looked at her for a long moment, not as an actress, not as a public figure, but as the woman who had walked beside his life in quiet ways, through years, through seasons, through unspoken chapters. Keanu placed the photo on the table carefully, like it was fragile history. "Some memories stay because they were never meant to leave," he said, eyes reflecting years of unspoken emotion. They sat together by the fireplace, not touching, not defining, not labeling, just being. Two lives that had traveled separate paths yet always circled back to the same emotional ground, friendship rooted deeper than distance, care stronger than time, a bond unburdened by demands. Sandra looked at him with a softness the world would never see. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if timing was kinder?" she asked very quietly. Keanu stared into the fire, flames dancing like fate, unpredictable, bright, uncontrollable. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But maybe we are exactly what we were meant to be, something that lasts because it was never forced." And in that moment, neither felt regret. They felt gratitude for the journey, for the connection, for the timelessness of something undefined yet deeply felt. The world might call it love. They called it understanding. Some call them soulmates. Some call them missed lovers. Maybe they were both. Maybe they were neither. But what they were, undeniably, was unforgettable. Their story was not a fairy tale with a final chapter, but a river with no ending, flowing quietly through years, through memories, through heartbeats that remembered. Because real bonds do not need public proof. They need presence. They need honesty. They need hearts that recognize each other even after time has changed everything else. The night grew deep. Their tea turned cold, yet neither moved. Some connections don't grow old, they glow. And theirs still glowed. The flames inside Keanu's fireplace cracked softly as if whispering stories that neither of them had spoken aloud for decades. Sandra rested her gaze on the dancing light, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug, though she barely drank. She wasn't here for tea. She was here because some nights demand courage, the courage to acknowledge the emotions one carries quietly for years. Keanu sat across from her, elbows resting loosely on his knees, not tense, but open, like a man who had finally stopped fighting time and instead started listening to it. Outside, the sky had deepened into velvet black, the wind low and silent, as if the world itself wanted to hear what would unfold tonight. Years of memories hovered between them, red carpets, shared laughter, shared silences, acting sets with adrenaline and chaos, cameramen yelling directions, fans screaming their names, articles trying to define their connection without ever understanding it. Through all the noise of fame, what remained unshaken was the soft, unpublicized truth. They trusted each other. Not because they were perfect, but because neither expected the other to be. Sandra took a breath, slow and deliberate, as though she were preparing to open a door that had never been touched. Keanu, do you ever think we lived two lives, one the world watched, and another nobody ever knew existed? Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried something deeper, like a tide rising after years of calm. Keanu lifted his gaze to meet hers fully. He always listened before he spoke, a habit built not from silence but from reverence. He leaned back, letting the weight of her question settle, then answered with the sincerity that defined him. Yes, he murmured, voice low, thoughtful. The world knew our names, but we knew each other. Sandra's breath trembled, not from sadness, but from the magnitude of truth sitting between them. She had lived a lifetime of scripts, yet none of them captured this, two souls acknowledging what the world never understood. This connection was not made of headlines. It was built out of shared respect, shared loss, shared resilience. Fame may have given them visibility, but experience gave them depth. She placed the photo back into the box gently, then looked at him with a softness that carried years. When I look at this, she whispered, I don't see actors. I see two kids who had no idea how long they'd stay in each other's lives. Keanu's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with memory. We didn't know, he agreed, yet here we are. They spoke for hours, not in fragments, but in flowing stories that intertwined like rivers. Sandra told him about moments she broke down in hotel rooms while tabloids printed lies about her life, about the nights she stared at ceilings wondering if she'd ever find someone who understood the person behind the fame. Keanu listened, truly listened, his expression softening like shadows melting into morning. He told her of quiet birthdays spent alone, of grief he carried for years without letting the public see how heavy it was, of nights he wished he could escape the noise of celebrity and just be human. In each confession there was no romantic claim, no desperate longing, only truth, raw and unpolished. What they had was rare. What they shared was gentle. What they understood was irreplaceable. Hours passed unnoticed. Night began to surrender to early dawn, the faintest streaks of blue appearing beyond the windows. Sandra rubbed her arms, not cold but contemplative, as though grief and comfort lived together inside her chest. Keanu shifted closer, not physically touching, but presence alone felt like a hand placed over a heartbeat. Then something unexpected happened. Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter, its edges soft, its ink slightly faded. Keanu stared at it, curious, eyebrows gently lifted. She placed it on the table between them like offering a forgotten treasure. I wrote this years ago, she confessed quietly, back when we finished the lake house. I never sent it, I was afraid. Keanu didn't touch the letter yet. He waited. He respected the moment that held both history and decision. Afraid of what? He asked softly. Sandra's throat tightened. She laughed a little, not out of humor, but vulnerability. Afraid that if I told you how much you meant to me, I would ruin what we had. I thought, if you knew how deeply I valued you, it might change everything. And I wasn't sure we'd survive that. The room felt still, not tense, but reverent. Keanu finally reached for the letter, unfolded it carefully, eyes scanning the words she wrote long ago. It wasn't a love confession. It wasn't a plea or an unanswered desire. It was simply gratitude, a beautifully raw note describing how he made her feel safe in a world that praised her yet rarely protected her. It thanked him for laughter, for comfort, for understanding the unspoken parts of her. When he finished reading, his hands rested on the paper as though holding something fragile. His voice came out warm, deep, honest. "Sandra, I would never have walked away from you because of truth." She closed her eyes, breath shuddering not from regret but from relief. "I know," she whispered. "I just didn't know it then." Keanu leaned back slowly, reflecting, absorbing, feeling. "Sometimes timing protects what people aren't ready to face," he said gently. "Maybe we weren't ready then. Maybe we were meant to grow separately so we could value this more now." Sandra looked at him, not with longing but with understanding. "Do you think," she asked carefully, "that some people come into your life not to love you romantically, but to teach your soul what connection really is?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Yes," he replied, "and maybe those are the bonds that last the longest." The room was silent again, but silence was not empty. It was full of things felt but not named, moments shared but not claimed, affection deep but not declared as love. It was the silence of two lives intertwined across decades, unhurried, unforced. As dawn brightened, Sandra finally rose from her seat. Keanu stood too. There were no dramatic gestures, no cinematic kiss, no confession that rewrote their lives. Instead, they moved closer gently, like two constellations drawn side by gravity alone. She placed her forehead against his chest, not as a lover, but as someone who trusted him with pieces of herself the world never saw. He wrapped an arm around her, not possessive, not passionate, simply grounding, human, present. They remained there for a moment that felt like a lifetime compressed into stillness. A moment that said, "We may not be lovers, but we are something eternal." A connection unlabeled, unboxed, unbroken. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were soft, luminous. "Thank you for reading it," she said gently. Keanu nodded. "Thank you for writing it." She smiled, the real one, the one untouched by performance. "I think," she murmured, "that the world will never understand what we are." Keanu's response was almost a whisper. "Maybe we don't need it to." She nodded slowly, not in sadness, but in peace. Some truths are not meant for headlines. Some bonds aren't meant to be explained. Theirs was one of them. They walked to the door together, not ending a chapter, but stepping into a new one. A chapter where honesty was no longer withheld by fear. A chapter where memory could finally breathe freely. And as she left into the quiet morning, both knew. This was not goodbye. This was continuation. A connection like theirs doesn't fade. It evolves. The morning after Sandra left, Keanu remained awake long after dawn had brightened his living room. The world outside resumed its rhythm. Cars passed, birds called, early joggers thudded down sidewalks, but his world felt different. Not disrupted, not shaken, just shifted like someone had quietly turned a page in his life without announcing it. He walked through his home with measured steps, reflecting deeply, replaying conversations stitched with vulnerability and memory. He held the old photograph in his hand, the sunlight catching edges like gold. He had kept many things private throughout his life, buried pieces of himself where no headline could twist them. But last night wasn't something to hide nor label, it was something to honor. Sandra drove home in equal silence, the early morning casting pearly light across her dashboard. Her eyes were open but inward, looking not at the road, but at years of laughter, shared scenes, interviews beside him where their smiles felt like secrets everyone could see but no one quite understood. She felt lighter, as though releasing that unread letter had released something inside her too, not love repressed, but gratitude unspoken. She realized she didn't have to rewind her past to imagine different outcomes. Life had been imperfect but meaningful, and Keanu remained part of that meaning. Weeks passed with ordinary simplicity, no dramatic plot twists, no sudden declarations, just two lives continuing their separate schedules. But something subtle had changed. Their calls became more frequent, not daily, but easy, natural as breathing. They spoke about their craft, film scripts, books they were reading. Sometimes they fell into nostalgia without warning. Laughter over incidents only they remembered, stories about their clumsiest takes, inside jokes that no interview ever captured. And sometimes, without effort, they slipped into deeper currents, talking about aging, about the legacy they wished to leave beyond cinema, about what it meant to be kind in a world obsessed with speed and spectacle. Then one evening, fate intervened with a quiet surprise. Keanu was invited to a private industry gala in New York, exclusive, low-key, yet filled with faces that shaped Hollywood's heartbeat. He was never one to chase crowds, but something about the event intrigued him. Sandra, meanwhile, had accepted a speaking invitation for the same evening, unaware their schedules aligned. They hadn't planned to meet. Yet fate has a way of reuniting souls without formal arrangements. He entered the venue dressed in classic charcoal, hair tied loosely, presence humble yet unmistakable. Cameras were prohibited, creating rare breathing space in a world addicted to documentation. Sandra arrived later, elegant in black silk, no entourage, no defensive glamour, just herself. When she spotted Keanu across the room, it felt less like coincidence and more like a continuation of a chapter destiny refused to close. He turned at the same moment, eyes catching hers as though the universe aligned their thoughts. No dramatic run across the room, no cinematic rush. Just two people walking toward each other, calm, steady, with smiles rising softly like dawn. "You're here," she said, tone warm and slightly amused. He chuckled gently. "Seems the world hasn't finished scheduling us together." They found a quiet corner, dim lights, jazz drifting like memory, tables scattered with candle glow. They talked effortlessly, but tonight the atmosphere felt different. Not heavier, just deeper. Maybe because both had opened old doors weeks ago. Maybe because silence between them carried history instead of distance. As the evening matured, the host introduced a short tribute segment, honoring actors who shaped industries with authenticity, humility, and resilience. Unexpectedly, both their names appeared. Photos flashed across a screen, their early days, their growth, their iconic roles. And inevitably, a still frame from Speed. A bus. Two young stars, eyes bright, future unwritten. The room applauded, neither could speak. Sandra's eyes glistened, not with regret but recognition. Keanu leaned slightly closer, voice low enough only she could hear. "Look at us," he whispered with a soft smile, still standing. She breathed a quiet laugh, still connected. The applause faded, conversations resumed, but their moment lingered like ember glow. They stepped outside for air, New York night cold, city humming with life. Their breath fogged slightly as they walked side by side. No cameras to read them, no public expectation hovering like weight. Just two souls under city lights that didn't need spectacle to feel alive. Sandra paused near a stone railing, looking out over a river flowing slow beneath. Keanu stood beside her. Silence held them, but not emptiness, rather fullness, like an orchestra waiting for one final note. Then came the conflict fate had held back for years. Sandra received a call from her agent, voice tense, urgent. A new film offer, career-defining, demanding long relocation abroad. A role she dreamed of, but one that would pull her away for nearly a year. She listened quietly, throat tightening, knowing opportunity had knocked, but also knowing what distance might do to something fragile yet profound. Keanu watched her expression shift, soft to unsure, hopeful to heavy. When she hung up, her eyes wouldn't meet his immediately. He didn't ask what the call was, he waited instead, like someone who understood time better than impatience. Finally, she exhaled. "It's a big opportunity," she admitted. He nodded carefully. "You should take it." Her gaze lifted sharply, not offended, but pierced by something deeper. "Just like that, you don't even know where it leads or what it means for us." Keanu stepped closer, expression warm, unwavering. "Because whatever we are doesn't depend on geography. It never has. We've been connected across years, continents, relationships, grief, silence. If something is genuine, distance won't break it." Sandra's breath shook, part relief, part fear. But what if this is our last chance to be present with each other? Keanu shook his head, voice gentle but anchored. Presence isn't only physical. Some people live in your bones, even oceans away. Her eyes filled, not with sadness, but the ache of realization. This wasn't a love story needing urgency. This was a connection needing trust. She moved closer, inches apart now, city lights framing them like starlight trapped in glass. Her voice softened into vulnerability. "Keanu, am I something you cherish? Truly, even if the world never knows what we mean to each other?" His answer didn't rush. It arrived slow, steady, like truth matured over time. "You are one of the constants in a life full of temporary things," he said, "and that doesn't fade because you follow your dreams." Sandra closed her eyes, a single tear escaping not from heartbreak but gratitude. He wasn't holding her back. He was holding her up. She nodded slowly, surrendering to trust. "Then maybe," she whispered, voice trembling with honesty, "we're meant to support each other, not claim each other." He smiled soft, sure. Maybe that's a rarer love. They stood there, two silhouettes against a river that never stopped moving, and they realized something. Some connections are not about possession. Some are about resilience, respect, evolution. Their bond was one such thing, timeless not because it was romantic, but because it was real. Tomorrow might separate them physically, but nothing could separate what waited patiently within both hearts. Not distance, not time, not fate. Sandra accepted the film offer, not abruptly, not carelessly, but with the calm resolve of someone who finally understood she wasn't leaving something behind, but carrying something with her. The night after the gala, she sat by her suitcase, packing slowly, folding clothes with hands that trembled not from uncertainty, but from the weight of change. Every fabric felt like a decision. Every zipper felt like time closing and reopening in the same breath. She paused once, holding the old photograph in both palms, her laughter beside Keanu's on that dusty speed set, the sun catching their youth like a promise. She placed it gently inside a book rather than the suitcase, close to her heart, not her luggage. Keanu, on the other side of the country, walked through a quiet morning wrapped in a strange mix of peace and ache. He was proud of her, truly. Success never intimidated him, but goodbyes always had a way of tugging at old scars. He prepared himself for her departure with a maturity that life had sculpted into him. He reminded himself that growth sometimes requires distance. Yet the night before she left, as they sat together in the garden behind his home, neither rushed the moment. Candlelight flickered across their faces. Moths danced around the glow. The world felt suspended in soft gold. Sandra rested her head against the chair, not touching him, but near enough that presence felt like contact. "Will we stay the same?" she asked quietly, a question fragile like autumn leaves. Keanu looked at her not with hesitation, but with steady warmth. "Nothing real disappears," he responded gently. "It just learns to survive in new places." She absorbed his words like air, slow, deep, necessary. Neither promised daily calls or constant conversation. They trusted something more powerful than habit, understanding. When her departure finally came, it wasn't cinematic. No airport chase, no dramatic tears. She hugged him, long, warm, silent, her face resting against his shoulder as if time gave them one still moment to breathe inside each other's presence. His arms wrapped around her with the kind of gentleness reserved for things you can't replace. Neither spoke goodbye. They didn't need to. Their silence carried a deeper meaning. "This is not an ending. This is us choosing to grow without losing each other." And then she left. MONTHSPASSED. Distance became a test, not a wall. Sandra settled into her new environment abroad, morning rehearsals, humid shooting schedules, a rented apartment overlooking mountains instead of city lights. She cooked simple meals late at night because tiredness made her crave warmth more than glamour. She kept the photograph tucked in a journal, occasionally pausing while reading lines to look at it, not out of longing, but grounding, a reminder that familiarity existed somewhere, even oceans away. Keanu returned to his own routines, training for action scenes, charity commitments, long motorcycle rides through open roads where wind replaced conversation and silence replaced applause. Yet sometimes, at red lights or in motel rooms between shoots, he also felt something missing, like a page not turned fully. He didn't text her every day, but on nights when memories returned like tides, he sent a simple message, not dramatic, just true. "Thinking of you. I hope today was kind to your heart." Some nights she responded within minutes, other nights days passed before she did. Not because affection faded, but because real connection doesn't demand immediacy. It breathes at its own pace. And then distance created something unexpected: growth. Sandra, while immersed in her new project, discovered parts of herself she didn't know existed: leadership, fragility, strength without performance. She journaled more deeply, laughed more freely, let tears fall without shame when exhaustion hit. She lived fully, not as a movie star, but as a woman rediscovering her own rhythm. Keanu, meanwhile, found clarity in solitude, long rides through rain-washed highways, evenings spent with books instead of interviews, mornings where he meditated under sun-filtered trees, letting peace replace the hurry of celebrity. In her absence, he didn't lose her. He learned what it meant to carry someone without needing to hold them physically. They grew not apart, but into themselves more deeply. 1 year later, a reunion no one announced. Sandra's film wrapped with critical praise. Early reviews called it her most honest performance, raw and unfiltered. She flew back quietly, no press, no banners, just a woman stepping into familiar soil with unfamiliar wisdom. She didn't tell Keanu she was returning. Something in her wanted to see what happened naturally if life placed them back in reach. Keanu didn't know either, not until one evening when he walked into a small local art exhibit he often visited in quiet hours. Paintings hung like emotional windows, colors bleeding like stories written without words. He wandered alone, reflective, calm, when suddenly a gentle laugh echoed from the corner of the gallery. The kind of laugh the world recognized instantly, but that he recognized internally. Sandra. She stood before a canvas, soft blue strokes like ocean breath, her hair loosely tied, wearing no makeup, just herself. She hadn't seen him yet. She was absorbed in color, emotion, silence. Keanu froze, not in shock, but in recognition, like a memory stepping into physical form. He approached slowly, not wanting to shatter the moment, not wanting to claim it, simply wanting to witness it. When Sandra finally sensed someone beside her, she turned. Their eyes met, not urgently but deeply. No dramatic music. No sprint into each other's arms. Just two people who weathered distance and remained. Sandra inhaled softly, lips curving into a slow, real smile. "You found me again," she whispered. Keanu shook his head gently, eyes warm with something unnameable. "We just returned to where we always were." They walked through paintings together, shoulders occasionally brushing, silence comfortable like breath. They talked later, long, sprawling conversations over coffee in a quiet backstreet cafe. She shared stories of filming, how the role broke her open then rebuilt her. He spoke of quiet mornings and deeper peace. They listened, really listened, and somewhere in that exchange, both realized something profound. Distance had not weakened them. It had deepened them. They had changed, not away from each other, but toward a more grounded self. And now, standing face to face, they understood. They weren't soulmates because they stayed together every moment. They were soulmates because separation never erased connection. Sandra looked at him across the small cafe table, voice steady with gratitude. "We didn't lose anything, Keanu. We just learned how to carry it differently." His response was soft but certain. Maybe this us wasn't meant to be defined. Maybe it was meant to be lived. And they lived it, quietly, deeply, without needing to explain, without needing to label, without needing to tell the world. Because the rarest connections aren't the ones people witness loudly. They are the ones that continue even when unseen. The cafe became a soft memory behind them as they stepped into the evening air, city lights scattered like diamonds across pavement still damp from afternoon rain. Neither rushed to fill silence with words they didn't need. They walked slowly, not as reunited lovers, nor strangers rediscovering each other, but as two people who understood, finally and fully, that life had woven them into each other's history not for ownership, but for presence. Sandra looked up at the sky, a lilac haze melting into navy, the first star blinking shyly through cloud edges. She wondered quietly how many nights she had gazed at distant skies abroad, unknowingly staring toward his time zone, thinking of him with a peaceful ache that wasn't longing but recognition. Keanu glanced at her profile, graceful, thoughtful, changed yet familiar, and somewhere deep inside he realized something profound. Love does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows like light does at dawn, slow, steady, impossible to stop once it begins. They continued walking until the path led them into a small park where trees whispered like old storytellers. A bench near a fountain waited under yellow lamplight, leaves drifting like decades gently falling. Sandra sat first, brushing away droplets of rain. Keanu joined, not close enough to touch, but close enough to share warmth. For a moment they simply breathed together, the sound of water soft behind them, the world moving around them without demanding attention. It felt like a chapter neither of them planned, but life insisted they write. Sandra finally spoke, not fragile, not hesitant, but grounded in truth. "Do you think," she said slowly, eyes on the glowing fountain, "that some people meet not to change each other's fate, but to steady it?" Her voice carried the hum of years of belief shaped by distance and returning. Keanu let her words settle like rain becoming river. "Yes," he answered, voice deep and steady. "And I think you've been one of those people for me, the kind that remains even when everything else shifts." The honesty between them no longer trembled with fear. It stood confidently, mature, sure, permanent. Sandra turned to him, face open in a way few ever witnessed. "I used to wonder if we missed something," she confessed calmly, no shame, no regret. "If there was a version of our lives where we were partners, not just parallels." Keanu's expression softened, his gaze steady like anchor. "Maybe there was," he said. "Maybe there still could be in another story, another timeline, but the one we got, He paused, not searching for words, but choosing them with reverence. The one we got gave us something even rarer. Sandra nodded, eyes gentle. A connection that outlived expectation. They didn't cling to what-ifs. They didn't mourn unrealized paths. Instead, they acknowledged what was something resilient, something undefinable, something unshaken even by distance, time, careers, and silence. Not every bond needs to become romance to be extraordinary. Some become something quieter yet deeper, a lifelong presence, a safe place, a mirror of growth, a witness of becoming. The night deepened, but neither felt the urge to leave. They reflected on their journeys, the roles that shaped them, the losses that carved them, the resilience that rebuilt them. Sandra spoke of moments abroad where exhaustion nearly broke her until she remembered his words telling her she didn't need to be strong every day. Keanu shared memories of solitary hotel rooms where loneliness felt like snowfall, quiet but heavy, until her messages reached him like sunrise. They were not constantly present, yet never absent. They were not each other's daily life, yet always in each other's spirit. That realization settled in both hearts like a final puzzle piece long sought. Sandra breathed in slowly, as if storing the moment in a place memory could never lose. "Keanu," she said, voice warm like evening embers, "we've never named what we are, and maybe we never will, but you're one of the most important people I've known in this lifetime." He looked at her with that quiet, consuming sincerity only he carried. "And you," he replied, "are proof that love doesn't always need a title to matter." Neither cried, neither held the other with desperation. Instead, they allowed peace to take the shape of acceptance. Their bond was not unfinished, it was fulfilled in a different way than fairy tales write. Fairy tales chase endings. Real connection continues without needing one. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint fragrance of wet leaves and new beginnings. Sandra stood, not walking away, but rising into the moment like someone stepping into light rather than departing from it. Keanu rose beside her, hands in pockets, shoulders relaxed, no tension, no fear, just presence. They walked back toward the city quietly, side by side, the distance between them not needing to close because it was filled with understanding rather than absence. A street musician played soft piano near a corner, notes drifting like floating memory. Sandra paused, eyes glimmering, recognizing the tenderness in the melody. Keanu slowed with her. They listened, not as a couple, not as separate stories, but as two lives intertwined without ownership. When the song ended, she turned to him with soft finality. "Whatever comes next," she said, "I want us to honor what has been." Keanu nodded, gentle certainty in his voice. "And whatever comes next, we carry each other forward even if our hands aren't holding." She smiled, beautifully, peacefully. We never needed touch to stay connected. They walked until paths diverged, hers to one street, his to another. They stopped, facing the parting not as loss but as continuation. No kiss, no cinematic embrace, instead a moment thick with truth. Sandra's eyes glowed in lamplight, calm as still water. "Good night, Keanu," his voice answered like a promise softly spoken. "Until life brings us together again in whatever form." She stepped away. He watched just long enough to smile. And then they both moved forward, not away, but onward. Because some bonds don't end. They simply live on quietly, in hearts, in history, in breath between memories. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, in this fictional telling, didn't become lovers. They became something rarer. A timeless connection that outlived definition. A presence carried gently across years. A story without ending, only continuation. And sometimes, that is the greatest kind of love there is.